Welcome to another episode of our inverted podcast or inverted product management podcast. This time, it's Yaron is not here. He's enjoying vacation in a wherever there is water and parties and sunshine, and his kids are having fun, and him probably as well. So it's just the three of us, Tom and Dana and me, and we'll do a bit of a shorter episode this time, just the three of us, where we'll talk about especially one of the topics that we found was very interesting that happened recently that we noticed that is less about news, is more about how can we look at it from an angle of inverted product managers. So, well, yeah, as usually to start, we talk about topics that are relevant for people who are responsible for trust and safety issues. And if you want to reach out, you'll find us on LinkedIn and all these other channels. The topic today is there was a news story recently where a botnet was found out that runs on Chrome extensions that was used to scrape websites. And website scraping, I mean, that's a story as old as the internet. It's the act of collecting information from publicly available websites to conduct whatever type of scam or impersonation or business you want to. I mean, we see this a lot with businesses that, for example, car listings, classified ads, any types of these businesses, they're often being scraped by competitors in order to either replicate the listings and get ahead of the curve, or we also see that by other websites with other public information. I mean, LinkedIn, you mentioned LinkedIn Dana earlier, being a website that has facing a lot of scraping because you get a lot of information that you can then assemble and compile and represent on your other website. So what has been found is this Chrome extension or Chrome extensions, multiple that have been distributed. They usually are a free service that does something that the user wants, and they would contain a library that would scrape the websites that the user would visit and send that to a centralized place. Now, when I read the article, I found that was very interesting. Is like I know a few people in the industry who, in their part of their career, has been tasked by reducing scraping on their own websites. And well, Dana, now that all these people who have invested money into reducing scraping on their websites and have been successful and have bragged about it to their managers that their money was well invested, and now the scraping comes back, have they failed?
Not necessarily. One point of order, we will put a link to the article in the show notes. So wherever you find this, we'll put a link to the articles we talk about in those notes. I think this goes back to a discussion we had a couple episodes before about metrics and publishing information to your management and knowing that attacks shift, and you could be looking for account compromise in a certain vector, and then all of a sudden the bad actor shifts to another vector, and now your numbers look terrible because you were detecting X number of account compromise a day, and now it's down to Y, right? Same thing with anti-scraping is you could be blocking everything because you're looking for a specific type of attack. The attacker shifts, and now being you're not doing as well with your metrics. What's interesting about this story is it makes it a little more difficult is they're hiding the bad traffic or the scraping action within good user traffic, so it's actually a good user trying to do something they would normally do, and the extension is then going in and using the valid user's infrastructure, their IP address, their computer, to then go and scrape other sites, right? And so it makes detecting that a little more tricky because to the service that they're hitting, um it it, it looks almost like legitimate traffic. But what happens is you need when you publish these numbers or talk about your protection systems, you have to make sure that everybody knows kind of what you're measuring and what your protection does, and know that there's going to be peaks and valleys or shifts because attackers are always changing. Like they're motivated to get through any protection system you set up. So they're either going to change their behavior or go attack a competitor, right?
Mm.
And so um it I always are reminded like of the saying, you don't have to be faster than the bear. You just need to be faster than your friend if a bear is chasing you, right? So so if your protection systems are okay, they might move on to attack a peer, but then they'll be back. So I think the bottom line is you need to account for attackers shifting all the time, and that has to be part of your plans when you look at what you're building as a security PM.
That's great. So, Tom, well, like when you talk to clients who are thinking about making investments and putting part of their resources to maybe hopefully solve a problem that they have, because I mean, for most companies, um, something reducing something like web scraping is more of a distraction from their core business. How
Mhm.
do you set the right expectations that problems like this are not one and done? Like it's not a let's invest in 2025 to eliminate web scraping and then never talk about it again. Um, and how do you set those expectations realistically without scaring people off?
Very difficult question, and I think a lot of it goes to kind of to a certain extent, the metaphor that Dana used there, which is to say, like, for some companies, especially companies, the core of their business, if the core of their business isn't going to be affected by like large volumes of web scraping from a like reputational damage perspective, like a LinkedIn or a Zing or something like that, then you're right, it's not going to be a priority. So, like one of the other ways that you can frame it is basically making sure you're faster than the slowest kid in the class. And you know, to a certain extent, it's like it's analogous to the advice that you I would give to kind of like my non-technologically inclined, you know, friends when they would ask like, what's the best way to kind of like make sure I'm bulletproof from a cyber perspective.
Mhm.
Whereby I would say, don't worry about being bulletproof. Bulletproof does not exist. Make sure that you're out of the lowest tier of possibility, basically. And when it comes to something like web scraping, to take a particular example, or like other, let's say, um, I was going to say unsophisticated. The technique that you guys described at the start of the episode is quite sophisticated in terms of like the embedding in legitimate traffic, but general web scraping is not necessarily a sophisticated attack vector, similar to like something like credential stuffing, right?
Mhm.
These are these are things where it's quite easy to kind of and simple to make sure that you're kind of taking yourself out of the lowest tier of risk and making sure that like we've talked about it before, like you're imposing complexity and cost on someone who wants to kind of take it to that additional level. And if then your business is one of those which then really requires that conversation about the ongoing evolutionary nature of the threat, then that's something that should be self-evident to the people who are involved.
Yeah, thanks. And Dana?
Dana?
Um, Tom, it reminded me like this discussion reminded me of something that I think you're familiar with, which is when you look at the tenets of zero trust, and like one of the major tenets is assume breach, right?
Mhm,
Like
mhm,
assume that no matter what you do, somehow someone's going to get in and or successfully attack you, and then make sure that you can respond to that, have proper logging, like all this other stuff. So it's kind of like that mindset that you should also be thinking about, not just, you put up something that'll prevent an attack, but they're gonna be back, something's gonna happen, they're gonna get in. Like, how do you handle that when the eventuality happens? It might be tomorrow, it might be 6 months, it might be a year, it might be 4 years, but at some point someone's gonna get past that protection that you put up, right?
mhm.
um
So
I
and
think
so
Yeah, I like the analogy both of you had, like either not be the slowest of your friends or be not the slowest kid in the class. And I think in a lot of situations where there are multiple people being chased by the same bear, because you're the information they're chasing after, like in this web scraping example, is available on different sources. Like if you're looking for generic email addresses, phone numbers, names, you can scrape that from a large number of websites. But what if you're the only kid in the class? Because the attacker wants specific information from you. And I'm thinking here about like local ads, local classifieds. Like if I want to reduce the gap I have compared to my competitor when it comes to car sales classifieds. Like, there's a very limited number of classified sites in each region. So I have one attacker and I'll be willing to go further to get that specific one because there's not an alternative. Like, how do you position being the sole owner of the desirable information against being the information is distributed across the web and you just have to make a smaller step. I don't know,
I
Dana,
know.
have you thought, I'm sure you've thought about, as you've seen these examples on both sides of the spectrum.
Yeah, this is going to go in a whole other direction, but it goes back to something that we had discussed in a previous episode, and that is know your adversary. Not only know their attacker journey, but actually what motivates them and what is their monetary value. Like one of the things you could do, I'm just throwing this off the top of my head. Like if scraping is a problem and they're targeting you, if you figure out how to throw in like fake ads or fake data that they then sell to their customers, that kills their reputation, which could kill the attack vector. So it's not only that's why as a PM, it's so important to not only know the attack, but know what financially motivates the attacker or how the adversary is monetizing this, because you can use that to figure out defenses that might be more durable. I always think back to we had so just an example of this, we call these abusive, like scraping is an abusive type of attack where they're abusing your system to pull things off. Another abusive type of attack would be like sending bulk emails. So like one of the things we did at one of the companies that I worked for previous is we used to have like a reputation of the user, like a new account wouldn't have any reputation. If they did some bad things, they might get a reputation. Um, but we had this class of accounts that had ambiguous reputation because we might have seen something interesting when they signed up, but didn't necessarily, you know, didn't know that they were actually bad. So what could we do? Well, one of the things is we could change the throttling on it so that when like it was unpredictable. So basically they went into a state where the throttling like was more aggressive, but they weren't totally throttled. So the bad actors were selling these accounts to go and send email, and all of a sudden their accounts are like randomly getting throttled, and their reputation, the seller's reputation of the accounts went in the dirt, right? Like nobody would buy accounts from them anymore because they couldn't rely on what they were buying for this bad actor. They had to move on, basically move to a different type of attack or something. So it's like you not only do you do defenses to stop an attack, but if you want to make it durable, you should really think about how they monetize these attacks, because that can really hurt the adversary. Um, so I mean, the net, if you boil this all down, is you need to set up your defenses, but you need to realize that it'll adjust and make sure you accommodate that in your plans, or or figure out how you can adapt to really hurt the bad actor, right? So never stand still, I guess, is what we talk about, right?
So I have two thoughts on that. Then it's really detailed thinking and a very provocative live example. The one thing that comes to my mind is that if you look at kind of like that as a defense mechanism, it's like it's quite bespoke. It's quite circumstantial to a certain extent. It's not necessarily something that's like repeatable as a pattern, or it's not something that forms like a kind of a revision to the architecture in a way that kind of like just creates a new frontier, right? It's quite a
Right.
it's quite a tactical measure, right? Um, which is just interesting in and of itself because it's not necessarily you're not changing necessarily the baseline of your system, which is the way that we would mostly think about like remediation is like build another wall, you know, for want of a
Right.
better
Right.
word. But this is a lot more involved, let's say. The other thing that occurs to me, and this is where I a little bit put my consultancy hat on, is that I mean, you guys come from organizations with engineering cultures, engineering resources prioritized. But like you know, for customers that who are widget manufacturers, or you know, for want of a better example, like local car dealerships, it's not something that necessarily comes to hand very easily. Like a lot of these people would
Right.
consume, like you know, for example, like their website design and run from a managed service, right? And that kind of very involved, circumstantial kind of defense mechanism is not something you're going to get on average from like a local, like mom and pop managed service provider, or even some of the larger global ones. Like it's something that
Right.
requires an in-house kind of like you know, um, like defensive engineering capability, which is not something a lot of companies will prioritize.
Right.
Yeah,
So
I
it's
think that's
like, yeah.
I think
Go
that's a
ahead,
really
Dario.
interesting point because the problem has a complexity that um, that's where that just like extends ordering another option from your hosting provider or clicking a button and
Yeah,
say
yeah.
you want to have Cloudflare now to do something that it didn't before. Obviously, all those solutions can help to some extent, but at some point, if the attack is sophisticated enough, you'll have to have a very good understanding of the problem. And outsourcing this is always a difficult one if you don't do it yourself. And that's where the questions come around. Well, do these companies see that as more as a distraction than really as as an element of their business?
Right. And like, Dario, we've talked about this in the past that actually before we started this podcast is like a lot of this information and security and securing services are siloed in these large service providers, like who
Mhm,
have
mhm,
teams that can handle this stuff, and like who's really helping the new services that come up, um or you know, existing large companies that are now dealing with it, and it really goes down to back to, you know, you really need to go find a third party because this information is not like widely shared, and you know, the technique, some of these techniques and things like that. I mean, we're trying to help here, but um, but traditionally, as Tom mentioned, it's built up in these companies that can afford and have the resources to do this. And so hopefully
mhm,
we're doing our little part of helping people think about this, but also, you know, there's companies out there that are attempting to help services prevent these types of attacks. I was working for one of those previously. It was one of the things that was interesting to me, and one of the reasons I joined them. And if you can look at my LinkedIn bios if you want to find out who I'm talking about, but that was one of the things that was interesting to me is companies that are helping prevent these attacks in a broad scale. Like I really think there's more that companies, you know, that companies can get out of these other companies. The problem is, and this is a whole other episode to talk about, but it's a cost to these startups and to these companies to pay for these defensive mechanisms. Um, and especially if you're doing things on the consumer side, it's hard to get those things funded, right? And like, oh, I want to get this company to do anti-scraping on our website. Well, your management is like, is it really a problem? Do I really need to spend these millions of dollars? Because it's not helping me generate more users coming in, right? Um, so it's really it's really tricky part of it, and um, hopefully we can, we can do our part to help people put some of this together. But it is a problem that all the info and all these techniques are known by a lot of the larger companies.
Yeah, I think as well, this comes back to another paradigm that we discuss a lot on the show, which is like the distinction that we draw between kind of like platform level providers, like you know, public internet backbone providers from a services and identity perspective, versus widget manufacturers, financial services companies, like others like that. And normally, like the narrative that we're saying is that, like, we're pushing a lot to emphasize the measures that are being taken on the like platform level. That, as we said, that's where a lot of these kind of key skilled engineering resources and funded people are. But also, like, if you look at the specific actors involved in the story that you'll link in the show notes, I mean, one of them is a platform level vendor, essentially,
Right.
which is, it's just not great.
Yeah. And we've been talking about like what does it mean for the people who run web properties or products that are being scraped? But how do we protect the people who are running these extensions, who for one reason or the other have been convinced that installing an extension that contains one of those libraries is worth is solves a problem of theirs because they're not installing the web scraping giant bots distributed system extension. They're installing an extension that solves, I know, that helps them to manage their workflow better, or a VPN extension to anonymize some of their data. But if we're of inverted PMs on the side of responsible running those workforce computers, or on the environment, like on the browser or operating systems, what are the risks that we can eliminate, reduce there, and what are the potential harms that can happen when these types of extensions get spread out to more and more users?
Right. I
Mhm.
think as a product manager though, and you're putting up defenses or developing security solutions, like you have to, it's hard to put the protection in because you have a valid user doing something and the extension doing something that you might consider malicious. Both look like it looks the same, right? It's come from the same computer and everything. So you can't just straight block because you don't want to impact that valid user. So as a product manager, you need to figure out what to do. Can you segment that traffic and only stop the bad traffic? Or are you going to make the decision that the unknowing user is going to be impacted as well? That's on your protection side, trying to protect your service. Dario, you also mentioned like what can we do to help those users like who installed the extension uh, and are using these malicious things. It goes back to the platform and getting those extensions, like figuring out its malware and getting those banned. And that's a heavy burden on the browser platform, right? That they have to do that. And obviously we expect them to protect the users, but it's a lot of work on their part. But the other thing is like publishing and sharing these articles and sharing threat information across the industry so people can expose this practice. And the podcast that you sent uh in the show notes that we had, there was a link to the YouTube video, and that gentleman did a great job of going through the whole thing and what the browser extension was doing, and really he was trying to inform other developers and end users of what was going on with this, and we need more of that, right? We need more of this information sharing and exposing these bad habits, um and we can't, I mean, we should expect and rely on the browser platform to protect the users, but they're not going to be 100%, nowhere near. It's a very hard job. I mean,
I,
they
I have a
purposely made, go ahead, Tom.
I have a much simpler formulation in my answer to your question, Dario, which is it's never the old internet adage never goes out of fashion. If the product is free, then
be skeptical.
exactly, then you are in fact the thing that is being sold.
Was it nothing is ever free?
No
Nothing
such
is
thing as
ever
a free
really
lunch.
free, right?
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I often struggle a bit with that statement because it's very simple. It oversimplifies it. I mean, you said that, Tom. It's a very simplification of the view because the products that often are being meant with that are products that are built to solve a real problem. And I mean, one of those extensions that have been found using this library would help would pay the users back and say, we pay you for unused bandwidth. Um, so you could at some point even say that the user knew what they were getting into, and is the who is the platform provider, is the browser entitled to say this is not okay because they're not breaking any services towards them. So I think it's a difficult balance for browser providers or operating systems to have to say what is okay and what isn't. Like, is it okay to sell your unused bandwidth for a service like this, but it's not okay to sell something else? And so where do they make that distinction? And I think Dana, as you said, it's really about informing people because I think a lot of the one of the things that this article highlighted is that a lot of developer who implemented these libraries to either monetize their Chrome extension or to make something easier in their Chrome extension didn't know what data they would actually collect. Cool. Yeah, time check. I mean, we could probably go much further about that topic. I really like that example because it's one of those inverted PM nightmares of scraping is a problem you can never fully solve. Like it's not a one-off thing. You make an investment and then you solve it. If the attacker is motivated enough, they will always find a way to get some of your data, to some of the data of your web portal. You just want to make it harder and less reliable and destroy the reputation of those attackers. And it's not something you just can solve with money and no skills and no personal involvement of your team as well. I don't know. Does anyone want to add something to that? Otherwise, we would end for today. Cool. Well, thank you so much. I hope it was still interesting, even just the three of us. And Yaron, enjoy your vacation. And I think we'll maybe do another one of those without Yaron, and then he'll come back at some point. And then it's going to be four faces again. We're still working on having more guests on the podcast. So if anyone has an interest in talking about these types of topics, on here, please get in touch with us, and we're always happy to have a fourth or a fifth face uh, roaming around on the screen and then talking to us. Yeah, well, that's it for this week, and well, yeah, keep on doing the work, keep on looking for what attackers are doing, try to understand it, and reduce their impact. Thank you. Bye.